Okay. Good morning. Last time we started this course about talking about beginnings, right? Remember that? Yeah, we call them strange beginnings, problematic beginnings, paradoxical beginnings. In other words, we look at the beginnings of different literary texts, like poems and novels, short stories. And there is always a problem about the beginning. Now, the importance of the beginning and how the text starts is because that's where you start making sense of your book. Because you begin with that. When you read and you want to understand the meaning, you want to understand what the text says, right? That's the purpose. This is your objective, is to understand what's in that text. What does it say? And so from the beginning, you have something that directs you. It's a title, for example. Imagine there is a book without a title. It's hard to imagine a text without a title. Sometimes in an exam, they give you a paragraph and say, give a title, which means that you have to read it. And after reading the text, then you would have to come up with a general idea of what the text is about. And from there, you try to find a phrase, a sentence, or something, a few words that would summarize it and give a sense of that text, right? Sometimes it can be, but that's an exam, and that's like part of what you do in class and what you're supposed to do in an exam. But when you're reading a text, a longer text, with a title, that comes with the title, it's already given to you in advance. So you have the title. And the title directs you. And sometimes the title can mislead you. You can find a title that's completely wrong. That's not wrong. It's done on purpose. Just like ironic, right? For example, I'm looking for an example of a title that doesn't give you exactly the same. Right. The example of Ulysses. Ulysses is a novel by James Joyce, right? An Irish writer. He's a famous writer. I have to write this somewhere so I can find where to write it. Maybe, okay, I'll see if I can open it. I can write that one, probably on my computer. If I can find it. Do this. Let's end this show. And open Word and documents. Here, okay. I'll write here huge letters. Is it like this? Yeah. I'm not good with spelling sometimes, I forget. I try to find the correct spelling. As you can see, I'm getting old, I guess. And I don't remember how to spell some. Yeah, that's correct. That is correct. All right, it's correct. That's the correct spelling. Can you see it? Yeah. And the novelist the author is James Joyce. Okay. Now, when you see the title, Ulysses, I don't know if you know the name, if it says anything, if it means anything to you. But if you look for Ulysses, for example, the title is that of, bears the name, it's the English, I think, name of Odysseus from Homer's Odyssey. I hope you know this one. Homer is a Greek poet, right? And he wrote the Iliad. His famous texts are the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? So, the Odyssey. That's the title of his very famous book. The other one being Telemachus. I think it's like that. Maybe the spelling is wrong again. It could be wrong. Anyway, so the Odyssey is a poem. It's a long poem. It's like hundreds of pages long. But it tells the story of Odysseus, also named Ulysses, who's, I think it's actually it's not the English name, it's the Latin name, because he was Greek, right? And the Latin name of Odysseus is Ulysses. Right? And so in French you call it Ulysse. I don't know what's in Spanish, but in English you call it Ulysses. And so Odysseus is this great, Greek hero who goes in these huge adventures, fighting monsters and fighting all kinds of things. He has like a mission to complete and come back to his wife who's waiting there, right, at home. And he goes for years until he comes back. And it's an epic, what we call an epic. Both of them are actually epics. What we call an epic. An epic is milhama in Arabic. It's really a narrative or a poem of adventure, of action. It's like action films. Action movies. You watch action films, it's exactly the same thing. For example, you've seen Troy. I don't know how many of you have seen Troy or Gladiator or those big movies. They are epics, right? Because they talk about huge battles and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, but in the novel written in 1916 by James Joyce, the Ulysses title is not about Ulysses. So it's completely different. But it does make you think when you read it. So why is he calling it Ulysses, right? And that will make you think about the reasons why he's saying that. He's using that title. While he's talking about a normal human being, just a nobody, just a normal man, who left his wife at home and went walking for a day, because the book tells the story of one day in the life of Leopold Bloom. This is the character's name, Leopold Bloom, right? Leopold Bloom is an ordinary 20th century, beginning of 20th century man who has like any other human being, right? Just has a wife and works. He has a job. His job is in publicity. And he left his wife at home, and he's suspecting her of adultery. He knows and he's sure that she is cheating on him with someone else. And so he goes around the city, and the book is 700 pages long, and it tells us what went through his mind. Not just him, because there is another character also. There are two stories that go together and then they meet somewhere. And the other character is called Stephen Dedalus. Another character, a young man, because the story has two beginnings. There is the beginning with Stephen Dedalus. Stephen Dedalus is the young poet who lives with his friends in the tower and who has lots of issues with his friends, but he's also with being Irish, but also because it's Ireland. It's all about Ireland, okay? And also about his mother who died, and his friend who was making fun of her, and so it's a long story. And a father who left, and a father who doesn't have a father. So he's looking for a father. He's young, and he's in search of a father. And then when you start reading, and that goes for like about 3 chapters, and then another beginning in which we have Leopold Bloom, this man here, starts his journey, leaving his home, walking around the city of Dublin, and discovering whatever there is. I mean, he's not discovering anything. He's just going around roaming. It's like roaming purposelessly, and thinking, and whatever goes through his mind is what we get in the text. And so it's a lot of free associations, so many references and things that we don't know. And you have to read the text with lots, basically with a library of books in order to understand it. I will show you an example. I will show you an example of a poem that's about the same thing. And so we have these two beginnings, and we have a title that doesn't say exactly the same thing as the story. And the chapters, each section of the book in that novel called Ulysses has a title, And it's a title that is taken from the Odyssey, from the book by Homer, by this one. Which makes it complicated. And so in order to read that, you have to say, wow, what is the point? Why is he using the form, the structure, and even the name sometimes and references to Odyssey, and talking about a man who has absolutely no qualities? A man without qualities. I mean, he's not a hero, he's not a prophet, he's nothing. He's just a normal human being. A normal man, and nobody, as we say. So from there you start. That's why it's very important to pay attention to forms. We call it forms because we're talking about the beginning of a novel, from the title and onwards. Okay? And I showed you some of the examples last time where we don't know, and because we link that also to questions of authorship. Who's the author? And whether the author is the inventor, like from nothing, right? Inventor from vacuum, from a void of the novel, or is he using other sources, or is he other inspirations to write his text? In other words, if he's using other texts and if he's using other inspirations, then you can say, so is that if he's inspired by someone or something, by a muse or by God or whatever, are they his words? Are they really his words? If he's inspired, the poet, for example, and you can say, and this is something that's not new, because we know, for example, the Quran, in our tradition, we say they are the words of God, not the words of Muhammad, the Prophet, right? He was inspired. They were inspired to him. Yes or no? So it's not his words.
Yes, it's not.
Huh? It's not. That's the idea. He's not. He's like a mouthpiece. He's like a machine that talks, right? He gets the information. He says whatever he has to say, and that's because it was inspired to him. But in that case, does that make a novelist like Joyce, or a poet? A poet like we have seen last time? T.S. Eliot, poets too? Are they prophets too? No, they're not.
No, that's why we call them messenger.
I'm sorry?
That's why we call them messenger.
That's why we call them messenger. So is the writer also a messenger in that case? If he is inspired. A poet, for example, Al-Mutanabbi. You know Al-Mutanabbi? Even though he calls himself Mutanabbi, the one who would be a prophet, right? But I think it's ironic, of course. But he says, is he a messenger? If he is a messenger of what? Of whom? What is he saying? What's the message, right? Exactly. So novelists are not messengers. But it's still a problematic thing. Because if you're using other material, other people's thoughts and ideas into your own, or you reshape them in your own, then... So the question of authorship, being an author, is also a problem. How are you an author? What makes you an author of a novel or of a short story? This is a question I'm giving you. Those of you who write. What do you bring to the text that you're writing? Think. Think and think, yes. Exactly, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It's the perspective that you bring on things, your view of things. Because the word is there. You're talking about, you're writing, like 10 of you or 20 or all of you, each one is writing a story about Wujda. Wujda is not in you. Wujda is there. Everybody knows what Wujda is. And you will be writing a story about Wujda, taking place in Wujda and whatever. But I will not have the same story. We will all be referring to Bab al-Harbi. But not one of you will refer to it in the same way. Right? You will be referring to it in different ways. Some of you may bring other things that you have heard about Bab al-Harbi, which makes it a text within a text, because you're bringing someone's text. A text is something that is out there. It could be a story you heard, because the text is not just written. There is written text, but the text, in general, a text is words, right? It's a narrative It's a combination of words. And so, if you heard the story about Al-Gharbi or Sidi Ihya, whatever, and you're retelling that story, you're not inventing a new story, right? But you are integrating it into your description or whatever about Wajda, or your report about Wajda, right? So that's what we're talking about. So what an author does is it brings a new perspective. For example, I talked to you about what happened here. Or this thing is me off. So when, let me go back to my, okay, here, all right, so I will give you that example again. Where is it? Yes, The Wasteland. The poem I talked about many times. It's a long poem. It has 5 sections. And we're talking about the first section. And so, before you begin reading the first lines of the poem, you face these multilingual hurdles because the text starts with quotes, with epigraphs, we call them. An epigraph. Are you familiar with the word epigraph? An epigraph is, where can I write that again? Oh, let me write it on the side. I should bring the small board. This is perfect. I don't even have my marker. Oh, here. My marker is here. Epigraph. I hope you can see it from outside. An epigraph. Okay? What we call an epigraph is like a dedicate, a word, a line, a sentence. When you say, for example, in the beginning, you open a book and you find something. I'll give you examples of the book that we have been studying the last semester and this semester. There is an epigraph in this one, I think. Yeah. For example, this book starts with this epigraph. I will read it for you. It says, "What the eye sees not, the heart rues not." What the eye sees not, I'm going to explain it. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't miss or doesn't suffer for. In other words, out of sight, out of mind, right? Or in Arabic we say, La Inshaft. Thank you. That's an epigraph, okay? But of course, those of you who read this book, in last semester in S4, knows that this is an ironic citation. Because this is it's the opposite of what's happening in this story. The character did not see her father, Sophie. She never saw, she saw him, but she didn't see him. Not enough, at least. He was absent all the time. And so this line, this proverb, whatever it is called, does not apply to her. Right? She can't visit her father. She did not see him enough, and so she suffers from that. So it's the total opposite. So it directs you. You say, oh, this is irony. Because when you read the story, it makes you think. When you start reading, it's the first reading, for example, you read this and you say, well, that's interesting. Let's see. And then you read the story and say, well, this is the opposite of what this says. Why? Right? Okay? So here, the epigraphs do that job for you. They direct you. They give you something. Right? The authors try to send something. And so what you have is, for example, here, we have this mixture of Latin and Greek. I can't even read the Greek words. Do you know how to read Greek? Who does? Did I say yes? I heard yes. I heard no. Was it no or was it yes? I thought yes. Okay. So what says, let's just read the English translation, which is down here. Right? No, actually it's over there. Right up. Right below. Because that says, Nam sibilan kiden komis ego ipsikotis ves didin antula pendere. You come here he said, whatever. This is the Latin thing, but you go here and you find, for once, I myself saw with my own eyes the Sibyl command hanging in a cage. And when the boy said to her, Sibyl, what do you want? She replied, I want to die. Okay, I will give you the context later, right? And you will understand. But why is Desiderius in the beginning? Right? Why is he saying that? At the beginning of the poem, he says this. He gives an image of an old woman. He's so old. She's so old. She's in a cage. And the kids ask her, what do you want? She says, I just want to die. But of course, she can't die. That's the thing. I will explain to you later in the context. And he says this. And then you start trying to read the next line. And then the poem begins with these lines. April is the cruelest month. Breathing lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull woods with spring rain. Very enigmatic, right? You say, why is April the cruelest month? Are there months that are cruel and months that are not cruel? That are nice? Maybe, yeah, if you think in terms of the weather, yes. For example, January or February can be very cruel in places where it gets really cold in winter. And March or April or May can be very nice because that's the beginning, that's spring and close to summer, and so in June is nice. And some other months are not really that nice. But that's not what he meant. Or maybe he did, who knows? Because the next line says, breathing lilacs. You know lilacs? It's flowers. It's a type of flowers. Lilacs out of the dead land. The dead land. Why is the land dead? Why would the land be dead? Okay. Mixing. Why is it called this? Oh, just connection. You do this once again. Okay. No idea why it's doing this. Okay. Or maybe it's trying to. I have no idea, right? But anyway, so, anyway, we will talk about dull roots with spring rains, etc. April is the beginning of spring. What happens in spring? What happens in spring? Huh? Good weather, flowers, plants coming up, right? It's the, yeah. It's like the rebirth or regeneration of nature because everything is back again after the winter where everything is gray and dust. We don't see a lot of it here, we see some. But in northern countries, for example, you go to Northern Europe or to England or some other place, France or North America, winter, everything is brown or black or gray. Not one green leaf. You will not see green stuff. There is nothing green. Starting November, everything goes down. The fall, everything falls. The trees shed all the leaves, and then everything is so gray, and it's depressing. And the sky is gray all the time. And so there is nothing green. And then starting April, you start to see the trees sprouting with flowers and, leaves first, and etc. And the grass, getting greener, etc. And so it's like a rebirth of nature, and he calls it cruel. Cruelty comes from the image of giving birth, right? It's giving for a woman, giving birth is something really great, because you give birth to a life. But at the same time, it's cruel because the pain is horrible, right? It's one of the. Ask your mothers. They're happy. She's happy to have you, but at the same time, it was like quite a lot of things, like a few hours of terrible suffering. It's like torture, right? And so that's why it's cruel, right? It has to do with that birth, giving birth thing. So he's equating women with nature, etc. So anyway, but let's move on. The only thing is that these lines actually have also been told before. There is this English poet, Geoffrey Chaucer, who's a Middle Age, in the Middle Ages in England. See, that's 14th century, 14th, 15th century. It's like the end of the Middle Ages. And he has also this long poem. It's called The Canterbury Tales. You can actually find it as a movie. It exists. The Canterbury Tales are also a movie. It's a lot of fun. It's very comic. It's satirical. There is lots of crazy stuff happening in it. So you can also watch it. And these lines are in it. when, that's one, but it says when. That's how the old spelling of English, Old English. When that April with his shores sought the drought of March hath proceeded to the road and bathed every one in which liquor of which virtue engendered is the flower, etc. So it's an echo of the beginning of this poem also. Sorry. Okay, so this, last time I talked to you about intertextuality, and I said that intertextuality, what we call an intertext, in Arabic they call it tanas. In other nas, right? It's like nusus, mixed up, if you want, in a certain way, in a deliberate way. Or it could be also out of sheer coincidence. If you're using things from that you know from your culture, integrating them in a text, or a poet integrates those other texts into his or her text, it's a form of intertextuality that is not directly admitted, but it's there. So, now, what I was doing to the text, the poem that we started with, and all those, the Joyce Ulysses and the poem, the Thessalic poem, was I was bringing things from outside to explain the text, right? I was referring to Greek mythology, to Homer, to the Iliad, etc., and using them to understand the text that Joyce wrote, right? Same thing also with the Thessalic, the poet. His poem is complicated, and so in order to understand it, with a little, if you're aware of those ancient texts, you would see them, right? And see, well, no, this reminds me of something. Right? It reminds you of something, and then you start looking. And so you're bringing text and bringing things from outside. You can even bring the life of the author too, right? For example, T.S. Eliot, when he wrote that piece, that poem, he was suffering from a deep depression. He was, and he was by a sanatorium. He was in Geneva, by the lake, that big lake in Geneva. It's called Lake Le Mans. He was in a clinic, in sort of a place where he was resting. He was resting there. And he thought of the whole situation, his own and the world situation after the First World War, with all the destruction and all the hopelessness and the disillusionment. Like, people really started to doubt everything. So if civilization comes to destruction, then what have we been saying about values, about religious values, moral values, civilizational science, knowledge? Humanity is doomed. I mean, it's like a big lie. It's like we're just illusions. We're just kidding ourselves if we have to end it like this, right? It was, you heard, you're familiar with the First World War and the Second World War after that, okay? Because then a lot of people lots of writers and poets committed suicide after that. I said, what the heck? This is not the world I want to live in. It's not going anywhere. If it's going to end like this, then just finish it off, right? And so he was thinking about all this, and he was deeply depressed, like I said. And there is even something that has to do with his own life, right? Like, for example, this is, I don't know if you know Edward Said. I'm sure we heard about Edward Said. He's a Palestinian-American who wrote a book called Orientalism, but he was a great literary critic. And his interpretation of The Wasteland is that T.S. Eliot had a problem of filiation. He didn't have any children, right? He never had any children. So he has no descendants, no one after him. Because the whole poem, The Wasteland, is based on a theme of the opposite of fertility. There is a word, I forgot. It's gone. You know fertility? Right? Huh? Somebody? Huh? The opposite is what? No, I'm talking about fertility. The word is but it's kind of what is it? Anyone? Huh? What is the opposite of this again? Like not having children, not being able to have children, for a woman or a man who are not they're not infertility. There is infertility, huh? Sterility. Yeah, like sterility. Yeah, because that's the major theme of the film. So like we reach the period of everything is sterile. I mean, there is, even though there is this birth of nature, etc., but humanity is basically just sterile. It's barren. I mean, it's like hopeless. There is no continuation, basically. And so he relates it to the fact that he never had any children. This is Edward Said. So it's a very interesting, if you have a chance of finding a book called The Word, the Text, and the Critic. The Word, the Text, and the Critic. This is the title of a book by Edward Said. It's one of his first books. And it's one of the amazing books about criticism. And he talks about T.S. Eliot and the problem of filiation. Right? That he, in other words, that he did not have a descendants, and he was in a deep depression, and he sees everything as dark, because the whole poem is dark, it's bleak, it's hopeless, but even though at the end there are some glimpses of hope at the end of the poem, we'll see, maybe we'll see that. Anyway, so what I was saying is that all of these interpretations of that poem or those texts bring ideas and elements and texts and context from outside. In other words, they try to create a context for the text. They say, no, this text actually is related to a larger context, including the life of the author, including the events that happen in the world, the texts that have been written before, his own education, because, obviously Joyce or T.S. Eliot were extremely educated. Those are people who read every book that there is. And so they're just like amazing libraries walking as a human beings. And so all of these things happen inside their heads. And, you can't write as if you have never read anything. I mean, the difference between a writer who never read a book and a writer who has so many books is completely different. I mean, you will not see the same writing at all. Even if you give them the same theme, they will write on it differently. Okay, so the context, the things from outside, etc., is something that was refused by some critics. They were called the New Critics, or New Criticism. It's a group of, it's a movement that started somewhere in the middle of the 20th century, 1940s, all the way up to the 60s, in the 1960s, 1940, 1960. And that movement, that has it was really good. It was great. What they were doing, I mean, they did something really great with literature, because they were the ones who made us aware of the importance of, for example, of symbols, of irony, of ambiguity. When you read the text, we're looking for those things that say, no, the text means more than the words say. They are inside. So. And they are also their practice, their method, the method of reading is called close reading. You read the text word by word. You don't jump. You don't read one page and jump to the 15th page and then no. You stay on the text from beginning to end. You read every word and you pay attention to every word and use all your capacities to understand every word that is said and say, because every word counts for them. Every word counts, right? Nothing is there for just like that. Every word counts according to their interpretation. So the way we read and write has been very much influenced by the New Critics and their practice, but there are some problems with that too. For example, the use of concrete, specific examples. For example, when you write an essay, your teacher will say, give examples from the books, right? Give quotes, cite the books, right? Because then you prove what you say based on the text, on the poem, or on the novel. You have to use quotes from the text. That's a practice that was used and was encouraged and recommended by the New Critics. It's the close reading I talked about, right? This is what we call close reading, and this thing is going to drive us mad if it doesn't stop flickering. I don't know why it's doing this. I have no idea why it's doing this. Anyway. Right. So for those people, for the no critics, they say no. There is nothing. There is only the text itself, text and nothing but the text. If you read the novel, you stick to the novel. Don't bring in anything from outside the novel. Do not bring information from the author's life. His autobiography is irrelevant. The historical context is irrelevant. Anything outside of the words on the page is completely useless. Don't use, everything is in the text. The text bears meaning on its own. It does not need anything to make it meaningful. So from the text you will find meaning without referring to other texts or bringing in any elements from the life of the author. That's the no critics position. It's very hard. It's a hard line position, saying no extra information, no extra text, no extra elements from outside what you're reading. You want to read T.S. Eliot, read it from the text. Don't read anything from outside of it. And I will show you how it's impossible. Right? Because without that you cannot work. But anyway, so they say to understand the importance of this idea, we need to remember that the form of criticism it replaced was, because they were reacting to the form of criticism that existed before them, and it was called biographical historical criticism, which, base every essay or interpretation of a work of literature on the life of the author, on the context in which he lived or she lived, etc. All those things, the historical context, the biography. This was very common until, let's say, the middle of the 20th century, and then the no critics wanted to put an end to it. They said we have to have a scientific, they call it scientific, so we have the scientific approach, right? We have to have tools that we apply. And we can use those to understand every text that we get, right? So they're not interested in elements from outside the text. It was, because before them, it was common to practice to interpret a literary text by studying a blank screen. Screen's gone, so I don't know. By studying the author's life and times to determine the author's intention, the author's letters, diaries, essays were combed for evidence of author's intention, because they were looking for the author's intention. What does the author mean? What does he want us to know? What does he want to tell us? Right? This is what you say sometimes. You say the author means this, or the author wants us to know this, or wants to say. Right? It's a common practice. We still do it today. All students do that. They say maybe the authors want to tell us something, right? For them, they call it no, that's wrong, and they have a word for it, right? They call it the intentional fallacy. If I could get that would be good, right? Here. They say that's a fallacy. A fallacy? You understand what's a fallacy? It's something wrong. It's false. It comes to false, but it's something wrong. It's something false that we shouldn't do. It's a mistake to read the text based on the author's life, or to think even of the intention. The intention of the author doesn't count, right? It's irrelevant. It's useless. What is relevant is what the text says, what the words of the text says. That's the important thing that we have to remind ourselves. Okay? And so, right. They say we don't know what the author intends anyway. Right? They say we don't know. We can never know what the author intends to say. It's impossible to find it. Even if you read his letters, his diaries, his autobiography, whatever he said, etc., you will never come to a final thing about what he said. It's all like conjecture, to say, just like an interpretation, but not really what the author means, right? Plus, they say the author can say one thing in one book and then write another book or another piece and say the total opposite. So what is his intention then? Which makes sense, right? Because an author, for example, you read a novel and then you read another novel by the same author, and you may find positions that are completely different from one book to the other. It's very possible too. And so in that case, they say, well, his intention is not consistent. It's not the same everywhere. It's not the same from one book to another. He changes his mind. right? And for the new critics, that's normal because they say it's not his intention, it's not his opinion, it's the opinion of the characters, right? They say it's an opinion of the characters. In other words, who speaks in a novel, it's not the author, but the characters. If you have a main character, and so whatever you get, whatever you understand from the text, is based on the character's point of view, not that of his author, of the author. You understand this? Right? This has been like a constant understanding, a constant, let's say, I would say a mantra, like something that we take it for granted by everyone. It's like a truism. You understand truism? The truism? Right? Whatever. It's something that we take as true, as something that is common, that you find everywhere. People saying, well, it's not the author who speaks, it's the narrator, and the narrator is not the author. Right? We never say that the narrator is the author, even though he can say things or she can say things that are related to their life, that you can identify as belonging, as part of the author's life. You still don't take that into consideration when you want to talk about who speaks. I mean, who speaks is a narrator. A narrator can be a character, it can be an unidentified. A third-person narrator is not necessarily the author himself. Right? These are like the common things. Right? And those are things that we learned from the new critics. Right? And they're very good. Sometimes they're very useful. Right? When someone, for example, blames someone, for example, there are films that have been made and people didn't like the representation of something in them. Like in Morocco, there are many films that have been made and people were mad at certain filmmakers to say, why does he show Moroccan women like that? The Moroccan are not like that. Right? Or they show this country or this part as like that. That's not the reality. Of course it's not the reality. It's a point of view, right? It's a narrator's point of view, it's a character's point of view, it's a world of fiction. It's not the real thing because this is not a documentary, it's a fiction, right? In films, you can't go to the director and tell him, why did you say this about this? Yesterday, 2 days ago, I don't know if you're aware of it, but there is a film festival going on in Oujda now. It's called the Maghreb Film Festival. Right? Are you aware of that? Yeah, well, it's at the theater, it's the big theater. You can watch. Films are for free. You can go anytime. You see the program and you can watch films. And there are also usually some discussions about the films. So there is this film that was premiered. It was the first time that it's shown. It's in Oujda in the theater. It was on Saturday, I think. No, not Saturday. It was Sunday night, around 8 o'clock, right? And so this film is about this region, about the region of this area anyway. It's not all of it, because one of the characters, the main character, is originally from Figuig, but he left at the time of immigration when the French people came to take workers from Morocco, right, to work in the mines in France. And so he went when he was young, and then we have the story. The film tells the story of his return as an old man, as a sick man, because he was working in the mines. And so you know miners usually, especially those who were coal mining, like in Jarada, right, they end up sick. The problems with lungs because of the dust that and so it's like solidifies their lungs, and he was not given much to live. They say, well, the doctor told him you have 3 months to live and then you die. So he wanted to come back to the country, and he came to Figuig, and he didn't like what he saw. And he was, the film was talking about how people are lazy and people are leaving and nothing is happening. And so there is this, and then there are people who are then not happy. I say, that's not true. Why does he say this about Figuig? Figuig is not like that. People of Figuig are hard workers. They're not like him. They're hard-working people. And they went at him after. When the film was over, and he was out, there are some people who lashed at him. They say, why did you say that about that? This woman was mad. And she told him, why did you describe Figuig like that? I am from Figuig. The people from Figuig are not like that. They are very hard-working people. Why did you say we're lazy, we don't work? She was not happy at all. And he was looking at her and said, no. What could he say, right? But that's not what he said. I mean, from this perspective, you'd say, that's not him. It's the character. There is this man who came back, living in the country for 50 years. When he came back, he found that everything is going down. That's not how he left it. He left a big farms, palm trees, and beautiful places. And when he came back, everything is dead. The houses have crumbled. The palm trees are dead. There is no water. Everything is dry, and people are not there. He was looking for work because he couldn't find any. And somebody told him, no, those people don't work. They spend their life just lying on their backs in the shade, watching TV or on the internet. And so he was not happy. No, people were not happy. But of course, it's not the director or even the script writer. They're adopting the perspective of a character. And so he said, no, don't judge me. I'm not saying that. The next film I'm making is going to be completely different, I know. I don't know, maybe. But you understand why it's so important? Because that was good. It's like a security for writers. We don't blame them for what they write. We should not blame them because they're adopting someone's view. Yes?
It's like when you're watching a series or a movie and somebody is trying to criticize a character, right?
Yeah.
What they say is that I'm not attacking the actor personally, I'm just criticizing the character.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's characters. I mean, in a book you have characters, in a film you have characters, and the perspectives of characters, their point of view is what you get in the book or in the film, but not the authors, not necessarily the authors, even though it can be, but it's still safe to say that it's the character's point of view and not the point of view of the author. Anyway, so that was really good. And so that's why they call it the intentional fallacy. That woman who was speaking to the film director, Rashid Douali, I don't know if you know Rashid Douali. He's a famous actor, but he's also a film director now. She was, very angry because she said that you have a bad intention, right? She said, your intention is to describe Fiqig as bad, as a bad place. That's what we call an intentional fallacy. She made a mistake by saying that was his intention. He probably loves Fiqig more than her. Otherwise, he would not even consider making a film there, right? Why would he go and make a film in some place if you don't like it? So, intentional fallacy, you understand it now? That's what it meant, okay? Anyway, there is more, right? In that sense, because new criticism is really important, so we have to. So, the same thing again, because we have in literature, in films, there is always a producer or what on it. Someone who's behind the text, someone who wrote the text, an author or a filmmaker, and you have the reader or the viewer, right, on the other end. So if there is an intentional fallacy, right, if it's wrong to ascribe the meaning to the character, to the author, it's also, according to the new critics, it's also wrong to say that the reader makes the meaning or creates the meaning of a text. In other words, you read, and it's not you who make the meaning is in the text, you only discover it. It's hidden in there, you just have to discover it. Now sometimes we have this idea, all of us. We work with poems, short stories, and we believe that the meaning is there, and it's up to us to discover it. Even the exam is, exams we give you in extensive reading or in novel or whatever that you're studying, it's based on this idea too. It's based on the idea that actually the meaning is in there, and I want to see if you're able to extract it and express it. But you're not making the meaning, right? According to the new critics, this is wrong. Because the reader cannot, this is the opposite. It's the new critics, that's what the new criticism taught us. To consider that the meaning is in the text, and as readers, our job is to unearth it, to discover it, to get it out to it, and say, this is it. Based on the text, based on the words, based on whatever is said on the text. All right? So they speak about the affective fallacy. Affective fallacy because it has the effects. The effects are emotions, right? Everything we feel. Fear, hope, love, hate, etc. We call them the affects. I know it's an affective fallacy. It's also wrong to base your criticism on your emotions. For example, you read a sad story about something, a story about someone who lost someone or something, and it becomes sad. And if it happens that you have lost someone also, and you had that experience, you will feel, and your interpretation will go with that. You say, oh man, this is, because you identify, right? You sympathize because you have something, the same thing. You probably went through the same experience, and so it tends to color your interpretation. It's a bias, right? A bias. It becomes subjective because you use your own experience that is similar to that story to understand it from that point of view, right? And they say that's wrong too, because you are bringing your own affect, your own emotions into the text. You should stay away from the text. Read it, but no involvement. Do not get emotionally involved in what you read. All right, that's the no criticism position again when it comes to reading. So the intentional fallacy confuses the text with its origins. While the intention confuses with its origins, the effective fallacy confuses the text with its effects. In other words, that is with the emotions it produces in us, in the reader. The effective fallacy leads to impressionistic responses. Impressions, for example, when someone asks you, what are your impressions about this film? What are your impressions about this book? You see sometimes, for example, journalists or TV, etc., when they ask people after some show, whatever, they ask them a question about, what did it say in Arabic? Huh? انطباع. ما هي انطباعاتكم حول هذا النص ولا هذا الفيلم? Right? That's what they say. Because in Dubai, it's like it's emotional. It's like, what made you think? What made you feel? How did you feel after watching it? Right? Okay. So, for example, if you don't like a character, then you consider that it's a bad person, right? Whereas another person might not like it, or will like it, and will not feel that it's a bad person. So there will be different opinions on the same thing. And also relativism. The text means whatever any reader thinks it means. Relativism in reading, it means the text, what you say it means, and what you say it means, and what you say it means, could be all different and all true at the same time. And so there is no point in discussing. Because if you think, oh, that's my opinion, this is my belief. So, end of the conversation, right? When you say, it's my opinion, it's my point of view. But then another person can say the same thing and then stand by their opinion, by their point of view, and there will be no discussion. Because you have your beliefs and they have their beliefs, and that's it. So where is the discussion? You can't discuss anything anymore. You cannot convince them, you can't convince someone if their opinion is already made and saying, no, I'm not changing it, this is my opinion. I think it's bad, it's bad. Right? I had this discussion over that film, the same film I told you about with the person who was next to me. And he said that this film is not good because it shows bad images of the region. And I told him, it's not my opinion. What I think is that a film is not supposed to show good images or bad images. A film is a film. It's a work of fiction. It's not supposed to be a celebration. It's not a documentary. It's not propaganda. There's a difference. But he wouldn't hear it. And so we ended the conversation. Conversation was over because he could not change his mind. Right? And I think he knows that he is wrong, but he would not admit it, that's all. Just kind of too much pride. Right? Anyway, when you have this relativism and impressionism, it means that we have chaos in criticism because there are no standards. No standards. You understand what standards are? Huh? In Arabic we say standards. What is it? معايير. Yes. معيار or معايير. By which we judge a film or a work of art or a piece of literature. Right? The no critic said we have to put an end to that. We have to set the criteria. We have to set the standards so that we don't have that crazy kinds of readings. Everyone reads whatever they want into this. They're like dictators, right? They're sort of dictators say no. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. I am right, you're right, maybe. If we do this, you're right. If you're not, if you don't apply the tools, you're wrong. Right? So they're like an authoritative kind of position in criticism. The only way we can know the meaning of a text is to study its formal elements. The same. That's the rule. They're starting to put the standards, the criteria for how to read a text and make meaning and extract the meaning, let's say. And say we have to use the formal elements provided by the language of the text itself. The images, right? Images, like what we can imagine when you see something. Okay. Symbols, metaphors, rhyme, meter, point of view, setting, characterization, plot, and etc. Okay, we have to focus on those. Those are the elements by which we judge a good text from a bad text. Right? So for no criticism, a literary work is a timeless, autonomous verbal object. It's a verbal object, but it is timeless. In other words, it's not limited by time. It keeps its meaning. When you read Shakespeare, that was written in the 17th century or 16th, 17th century, and you read it today, it should keep the same meaning. What it meant then is the same as it means today. Right? Right? This is a very bizarre position, but that's what it is. You have it also in religion. For example, when people say what the Quran meant in the 1st or 2nd century to those people who explained it in those books, right? Tafsir, what we call tafsir, should be the same today. What it means to them, it means to us. Well, of course it's wrong. We're not the same people. We don't even have the same language anymore. And we don't have the same, social or historical conditions. Things have changed. We're not the same. Absolutely not the same. There is nothing that can compare. So, we have to read it in our own way. In other words, we have to read it. But that's something we will see with different forms of criticism because it applies everywhere. We have to see it in different times. Say, meaning changes with time, with circumstances, with people, with languages, with areas, with places. Okay. So, all these elements are important in the text. But for the new critics, it's final, no discussion. Right? Okay, readers and readings may change, but the literary text stays the same. Its meaning is as objective as its physical existence on the page. The meaning is objective. It never changes. It does not change from one reader to the next or to the others. It stays the same. For them, it is fundamental. This is non-negotiable is the same. Okay, that's actually what brought the end. This is why neo-criticism did not continue. I mean, it continues as a practice a little bit, but with with a lot of changes. We still use some of the elements. For example, we focus on images, symbols, metaphors, rhymes, etc. We do that all the time. It's very important. But we don't believe this. We don't believe that the meaning of a text stays the same over time. We don't believe it's timeless. We don't believe it's permanent, never changes, etc. So that's not the same. Reading Shakespeare today is not reading Shakespeare 200 years ago. Right? You will not see the same thing. We'll read it differently. We'll read it with different glasses. Right? We have different. It's like you're using different glasses with colors. Imagine different lenses. You have if you put yellow glasses, everything is yellow. Put blue, everything is blue. Red, everything is red. Transparent, everything is okay, etc. So it's like that. We have colors. We have glasses or sunglasses with different colors, and we see with those. Okay. Are there any questions? First, yes.
So we cannot understand an old book.
I'm sorry.
Correctly. We cannot understand an old book correctly.
For us, or I mean, how? I don't know. Huh?
It's old. There's no.
We cannot understand it correctly? I don't know what correctly means. Correctly according to what? Are we talking from the position of new critics?
Yes.
For the new critics, there is only one way to understand the book, and it should be the same everywhere for everyone.
So the meaning does not change.
For the new critics, meaning does not change. But like I said, neo-criticism has changed too. It was called new criticism, but it's not new anymore. There are other forms of criticism that appeared, other ideas, other thoughts, other ways of analyzing that says that this is garbage. That what they believe in is not good, is not working.
For us, the meaning can change. So for us, the
Yeah.
meaning can change.
Country?
The meaning can change.
The meaning can change. Oh, the meaning changes all the time. Because language changes.
So what about the religious scriptures?
Yeah. The understanding is not the same. The way they were understood in the past is related because when you read, for example, how they were explained at the time, people used the knowledge that existed at the time, the science of the time, the history of the time, the idea of society at the time. What is society today? If you understand, how do we understand today's societies? Is it the same as they were understood 1500 years ago? Absolutely not the same. Even if you look at Morocco 21st century and in the beginning of the 20th century or 19th century Morocco, society is not the same as it is today, right? Women did not work. I mean, did not go out, have jobs with men, etc. And so society has changed just because of that. This is just one example. And so whatever you say about women, for example, according to the old interpretation of the religious texts, does not count. It doesn't work today. You can't say, no, you have to stay home. Everyone, all of you, stay home. No war, no women. You can't be doctors, you can't be teachers, you can't be anything. Stay home. It's impossible, right? The first person who would say that, women themselves, says no. Why do you want to force me to stay home? I want to study. Otherwise, there will not be all these ladies here. Okay, so that's changing, right? This is just one simple example. Anyway, so any other question? The text is the same, the meaning changes. Because the meaning is related to the reader, not to the text. The text has what it says, but how we see that today is not the same we saw it. Well, people saw it in the past. Because when you see it with the glasses of today. Your glasses is what you know, your culture, your society, your reality, the world today. You take in all of those, make up your way of understanding that text. That's your perspective. That's the perspective that we're adding to it today. An ideological position, a political position can add to it. Knowing history, right? Someone who knows more history than you can have a better explanation than the one who doesn't know history at all, etc. So it's all, it's important. Even knowing the history of the text itself, knowing the history of the ancient, explanations also play in that, right? So those are very complicated issues, and they are related to criticism. This is what we call building a critical mind. Critical thinking is based on this. Right? All right. Any questions? Or I move? Okay, let's move then. All right. Okay, literary language and organic unity. Okay, a few things again, just some of the concept of the main elements of neocriticism, like for example, denotation and connotation. Denotation, you understand what it means? And connotation, right? It has to do with language and what it means. We say denotation is the literal meaning, right? Man al-harfi. Connotation is the hidden figurative meaning, the one that is behind. For example, say you're a lion. If I say you're a lion, the denotation is that you are an animal. Right? Literally, it means you're an animal, right? But if you say you're a lion with the connotation, because I'm using a metaphor, then I am, right? I'm comparing you to a lion because of your, I don't know, something about you, but what lions are. I mean, how we think about lions. A lion is we can see it as a noble animal, we can see it as the king of the jungle, whatever you want to say, right? So we think, I'm using a different meaning. One that is connotation, we call it. The connotation is different. So, for example, literary language and everyday language, right? That's the difference. We have scientific language, we have everyday language, and we have the literary language. right? For the new critics, literary language is very special. It's not the same as everyday language and as scientific language. Scientific language is related to reality, to things that you want to say. For example, to say, well, this is this and that, you know science, and how science talks, right? Geology, physics, whatever. It's very plain, and it doesn't have metaphors, this is actually the general understanding, and sometimes in science too, we use metaphors, right? There is a lot of imagination in science than we think, right? Everyday language, it's different from science. Okay, this doesn't help. Scientific language and everyday language depends on denotation, the one-to-one correspondence between words and ideas. You will learn it's the one-to-one relationship. In other words, a word means something, means that which it means, and nothing else. For example, I say you're a lion. It means you are a lion, an animal. That's denotation. But of course, I don't mean that. I mean that you have the qualities of a lion. But everyday language can also have connotation too. Scientific language, however, does not. Scientific language is plain, right? When they say the water boils at 100 degrees, water boils at 100 degrees. If you put it in a poem, it means something different. It can mean something different. If you use that line, I am boiling like water at 100 degrees, if you say that as an everyday language, or it's a poetry, right? Because that becomes an image. It's a metaphor. I am saying something. I'm saying I'm boiling like water. That means I want to explode. I'm mad. I'm angry, or something. Right? In Arabic, what do we say? Someone is angry. An image. It related to that, like boiling. When you say boiling in English, he's boiling. That means he's like he's about to explode. In Arabic, huh? Yeah, how? Kehli. It's like water. Kehli. That means he's really mad, right? Or she's really mad. So everyday language, everyday language allows for some metaphors and expressions. Sometimes we don't want to say things straightforward to a person, so we use irony, we use kind of, symbols, we speak metaphorically. Irony is very common in everyday language. But scientific language is quite different. So, but in general, it's denotation, right? The common thing is it's based on denotation. In other words, literal meaning. When you say to someone, let's go, it means let's go. I mean, why are you here means why are you here, right? It's not poetic. So literary language, on the other hand, depends on connotation, which means an implication, an association, right? A suggestion, an evocation of meanings and of shades of meaning, nuances, right? Meanings and shades of meaning. So literary language makes you think differently about the words that you're using. You're not using them at face value, you're not reading them superficially or literally. You have to read them a different way, right? You have to be a little suspicious, right? Of what you're reading. For example, while the word father denotes male parent, when you say my father, you know it's my father, right? It's the male parent. But the connotation in literary language would be authority, protection, and responsibility, for example. Fatherhood is not about being a father. It's not a biological thing only. And actually, fatherhood is not always just biological. You can be a father without being the biologically, father. Because it has to do with care, with love, with respect, with the protection, etc. for the child. So that's the connotation. That's why, for example, they say biological parents. You hear about biological parents, and you have a parent. And sometimes biological parents are not the real parents. You have somebody else who is the real parents, because the biological parents are the one who brought the child to the world. But sometimes they just give them up or throw them in the streets, so they're not really parents. And the parents would be the ones who took the children in and took care of them, loved them, cared for them, protected them, taken them to school, provided for them, etc. And that's parenthood. That's real parenthood, not the one who just caused them to exist, generated them, and let them in the street or dropped them somewhere and left. Okay, so biological parents is not always. Anyway, So connotation, denotation, two important elements. We say literary language is expressive. It expresses more than it says. When we say that's why we talk about expressive realism, for example. In other words, you have a realist story, story that sounds real, but it expresses more than the real thing, than the thing that it says. We call it expressive. Like in art, for example. In art, there is a movement called expressionism. Expressionism is based on figurative language, even though it's an art, but it says more than actually the picture shows or the whatever is on the canvas. Everyday language is often connotative and expressive. Two, I said that already. And literary language, the last line here, however, organizes linguistic resources into a special arrangement. That's why it's important. That's what makes literary language different, because it has a special arrangement. It's not always apparent, because if it's based on metaphors, then it's a different language. The arrangement is the order in which you put things, right? Arrangement is order. To arrange things is to put them in order, right? Or order in a certain way. And literary language uses words in special ways. Special ways means not denotative, not superficial, but in ways that the author think about, saying, instead of saying things plainly, it would say them differently. For example, you read the Fables. You know the Fables? You understand what's a fable? Anyone? What's a fable? Fable. I'm sure you know it. Not poems, no, it's stories. They're, yes. Right, exactly. Animal stories, stories about animals. Kalila wa Dimna. Or Les Fables de La Fontaine, yes, La Fontaine. Kalila wa Dimna is mostly known in Arabic literature. It's stories of animals, and animals speaking like human beings. But it's not, animals don't speak. And so they say sometimes things, and usually they use fables in order to hide political positions. For example, Ibn Muqaffa was not free to speak his mind directly about the government, about the ruling, about the society, etc. So he was hiding his ideas in fables, in animals speaking, right? A story of animals. So the authorities will not imprison him or kill him because they said something bad about them. And so he said, well, it's animals. I didn't say you. I was talking about the pigs or I don't know what, the snakes or something. So unless you think of yourself as a snake, then this is you, right? So you understand this, right? The fables are ways of using language in a different way in order to avoid censorship. You understand censorship? Muraqaba, that will stop you from saying things. Or to avoid, for example, political, persecution. Because then the government will not be happy with you if you say something. So you have to say it differently. That's why you have songs, for example, that speak about the reality of people, but not in, you have to be careful. You have to pay attention to read between the lines, to read differently so that you can understand that the meaning of a song is not exactly what it means. It means something more than that. That's how you can avoid being, controlled by the government or politics or society. It's not just the government, it's also society also sometimes. They don't like always what people say, so Anyway, so special arrangement, complex unity, we call that, to create an aesthetic experience, a word of its own. So that when you read that text, it's an aesthetic experience, we call it in other words, you experience something aesthetic. Aesthetic means pleasing means pleasure, so it means beautiful. It's about beauty. Aesthetic is, in philosophy, aesthetics is the philosophy of beauty, what it means, right? Beauty. So aesthetics. And so that's an experience. And it's not just about, beautiful flowers, but beauty is the truth, right? Saying something as the truth could be beautiful too, right? In the sense of the truth. There is a poem that says, truth is beauty, beauty is the truth, and that's all you need to know, right? Do you know this poem? It's the end of the poem by Keats, John Keats. John Keats is an English romantic poet. Okay? All right, so we move on. Form and meaning content are inseparable. So the form and content are the same. The meaning is, we cannot separate the content from the form. You heard that all the time, right? Because one determines the other. This is also something that the Neocritics spoke about, right? The form of a poem determines the form. The form of a text, for example, a literary text, a poem, and a short story. There are two different forms. And the form of that, because it's a poem, you would treat it differently. It's not narrative. So whatever it means, it's because it's related to the form in which it comes. The lines, the verses, the metaphors, the symbols. A short story is narrative, and so its meaning will be a lot easier to get. And so, because it's determined by the form in which it comes as a story, as a narrative, it's easier to understand than if you read a poem that's enigmatic, that's broken, that doesn't, respect the syntax or the grammar most of the time. So, you understand this? Okay. There is another thing which we call the organic unity, الوحدة العضوية. All parts of a story, the symbols, the metaphors, cannot contradict one another. They have to be complementary. They have to be integral in one thing. If there is paradox, if there is a contradiction, then your reading is wrong. Not the text is wrong, it's you wrong. Or maybe the text is bad. The writer is not good. He's not a good writer. If he makes contradictions, it means that there is not. For the Neocritics, if there are contradictory, big contradictions and contrasts and paradoxes in a text, it's not very good to say, wow, this is not a good text. This is not a good book. This is not a good story. Right? Today, actually, that's what you're looking for. When you read a text, you're looking for paradoxes. And we say, oh, this is a good text because it has paradoxes, because it's contradictory. It has ambivalence. It's ambiguous. That's what we like it. Right? It doesn't say straight things. Right? Anyway. The complexity of a text. Text must have complexity. And the complexity of a text shows when all the elements that are used, the formal elements, are integrated in one organ, organically integrated, right? As a one thing, as a unity. Okay? Because there is complexity and there is an order, because we say it provides both the complexity that represents the complexity of human life. The complexity of a text mirrors the complexity of human life. Human life is complex, right? And so a literary text should be also complex because it comes from a human life. And so they should be simple. There is complexity here and complexity there too, right? And order, the search for order, because that's a thing that humans always look for. We're always looking for order, right? In chaos, we don't like chaos, we want order. If it rains too much, you want to have like some good weather. If there is too much wind, you say, when is it going to stop? Right? Because it's chaos. We are like based on this. Our lives are based on order, and so we look for order everywhere. Your parents, for example, you cut your rooms. They say, oh my God, you cut your room. Can you clean up your room? Your desk is a mess. There is everything. There is food. There is stuff. There is dirty dishes and whatever you put on your desk. And your parents are not happy. They want to have order. Say, no, clean it up. Take this to the kitchen. Put this in your closet. Take this to your bag. Leave it clean. But you don't do that, right? You're out, so you don't care. Anyway, so these are the criterion, if you want. It is the criterion by which Neocritics judge the quality of a literary text. Now, I will show you something different. Okay. This is what I'll come back to this because I told you about this one, but I'll show you something else before we go there. I'll give you an example. Not this one. It's this one. Here we go. Remember T.S. Eliot I told you about, the Wasteland? Do we have it? Right? In order to read the poem called The Wasteland, this is only the first chapter. It's called The Burial of the Dead. And I will show you why it's the neo-criticism thing are not always working, right? All the things that we saw about neo-criticism, their insistence on this and not bringing the text from outside, not bringing in any elements from outside the text, that's completely useless. Here, you have that line in the beginning, that epigraph. The opening of the poem starts with that thing in Latin and Greek at the same time. That is a problem for the new critics. They don't know how to deal with that. You can read it, but it means nothing. I mean, even with the translation, you still have to look for the story. And then you will ask yourself, why is it there? Look at that, the context. You can see the context here and what it says. You have the translation. Okay. That quote is from a story, from a long poem. It's called the Satyricon. Satyricon was written. Satyricon was written in the 1st century AD, right? It's the 1st century. in Christian eras, like now we're 2021. Imagine year 1, right? The 1st century AD. That was the time when this poem was written. And there is this story, and there you have the Gaius Petronius, and this is the translation, of course, by T.S. Eliot himself, because that poem comes with notes. It's annotated. T.S. Eliot, when he wrote his poem, and he knows that his readers will have trouble understanding it, so he put notes. So he can direct us on how to read his poem. And for that one, the Latin and Greek quote, he says this. I saw of course, the translation here, and the Satyricon, of course, tells of the misadventures of a former gladiator through the Roman Empire. Wait. Let me see if I can do it. What was this stuff? Here. Okay. This is terrible. Not this. Okay. Roman Empire, right? The Satyricon is of the misadventures of a former gladiator through the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD. The only fragments, of course, remain. The scene that it quotes occurs. Let me see if I can this part. How do you do this? Where's yours? Not good. No. I have to find what line? Does it make no? Huh? Not good. Not good. I can't see the other side. Oh. Okay. I'll do this. Okay, so only fragments remain of that text. The scene, as it calls, occurs during a feast at the villa of a wealthy buffoon. The buffoon, you know it's a buffoon? Named Trimalchio. So we have a context for that, right? We have a context for this thing. And who is Cybele of Cumae? Was a prophetess in service to Apollo. You know Apollo? The Greek god of poetry, of art, of beautiful things, right? And of war as well. And of great beauty. Apollo wished to take her as his lover and offered her anything she desired. She asked to live for as many years as there were grains in a handful of dust. In other words, she took a handful of sand and said, count the grains of sands in my hand and give me the numbers of years to live, right? Which is a lot. You know, take a handful of sand. It will be really a lot of years. So Apollo granted her wish, but still she refused to become his lover. In time, the Sibyl came to regret her boon, in other words, the gift he gave her, as she grew old but did not die. She forgot to ask for youth and health. Right. She asked for a long life, but she forgot to ask to stay young. And so she regrets. That's why she wants to die. But she can't die, because she has to live all those years. Right? The god Apollo gave her her wish, and she said, I want to live 1,000,000 years, so we have to live 1,000,000 years. And it doesn't matter how old you become, or how, whatever state you would be in. And she's suffering because her body is deteriorating and she can't die. Even if she wants to, she can't die. That's why in the poem it says, I want to die. Right? I just want to die, when the kids ask her. So this is mythology, of course. So you have this. She lived for hundreds of years, each year becoming smaller and frailer, Apollo having given her long life but no eternal youth. When Trimalchio speaks of her in the Satyricon, she is little more than a tourist attraction, tiny, ancient, confined, and longing to die. Right? So she does not. So then you have this scene that opens the poem. Or I have this thing, right? A reference that opens the poem in there. And you can't just forget it. You can't just ignore it. You would know the story, you would know the context. Then you would have to ask questions. Why is it there? How does it relate to the poem? And remember that the first section of the poem is called The Burial of the Dead. She's not dead, she can't be buried. Okay? And there is this too. Ezra Pound is an American poet. He's a contemporary of T.S. Eliot. He's one of the greatest American poets. And so here is the thing. Now I have to show you, I've already shown you the first lines of that one, but I put comments on every section, okay? On every one. Okay. Like here, for example, this is the rest of the poem, the following lines. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dry tubers. Summer surprised us, coming over the Starboard Sea, whatever. With a shower of rain, we stopped in the colonnade and went on in sunlight into the Hofgarten and drank coffee and talked for an hour. Okay, well, it's like a conversation. Somebody's talking. Someone is saying something, and we have no idea who that someone is. Someone is talking about this. Winter kept us warm, yes, because you sit inside, you have heater, and you eat warm food and wear clothes that are warm, etc., and so it keeps us warm. Covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dry tubers. It's like the relationship with with seeds that are under the ground, in the soil, waiting for spring and waiting for the rain and the heat so that you can come out and live again. So it's a little life with dry tubers. Tubers are like the roots, the small roots that still exist, that keep there, that are staying inside the soil until they come out in spring. And here summer surprised us, coming over the starboard. This is an area, it's probably in Switzerland or in Germany, I don't know. But with a shower of rain, we stopped in the colonnade and went on in the sunlight into the garden. If you just limit yourself to what the text says, it's impossible to know what's going on here, right? In order to understand why this conversation is here, it sounds like a conversation. Somebody's talking. Someone is talking about an experience. A shower of rain, going to this place, going for ice cream or whatever, have coffee, and talks for an hour. Bin gar kein Russen Stamm ausleiten, it's Deutsch. It's German. It says, I am not Russian. right? I am from Lithuania. All these things, right? And then you have to say, well, it's like, this is like a crazy person speaking, because you have all of these different parts in the poem that are completely crazy. And you look at them and say, what the heck is this? But you can only understand them if you go back to the text, to outside. You have to look for sources. You have to look for the notes that he wrote for this. You have also to look for the people who talked to him, the letters he left, the notes he wrote about the poem, the discussions he had with other people. I'm talking about the poet, right? T.S. Eliot talked about his poems a lot. A lot of people wrote about him. Many people went and looked for these and asked him questions about this. And do you understand that in this poem, he was writing from his memory, associations, things that went into his mind. He was in Geneva. He was in this sanatorium, this place where he was recovering from a bad depression. And he was writing memory. He was writing from his memory. And associations. There are lots of associations by working. So we call a flow of consciousness. Whatever goes into his mind, he puts it there. And he was, of course, arranging things. It's not random, but he was doing that on purpose. Right? And so when you read this line, it's a conversation he heard in a bar or in a cafe or something, and he adds it in there. Right? And then you would have to ask, why is he doing this? The point is, we're not going to understand. This is not about poetry. We're not doing a class in poetry. We're doing a class on how to see how criticism deals with texts and why sometimes it's limited. We saw neo-criticism, and it sounds great when you the first time, and then you see there are limits to neo-criticism, right? Because then there will be another way of understanding text that says, no, we have to use text because texts are not independent. There is no autonomous text. The text is a mixture of other text. It's a textile. It's woven. It's like weaving text from other places. This is what we get here. We have text from old times. We have conversations. We have small, fragments. It's all fragments, and these fragments, they don't have to have organic unity. The organic unity is what you will give it yourself, not the text itself. It does not give itself organic unity, but it's you, as a reader, if you're able to find all these sources, if you're able to find where these texts come from and what they mean, etc., then you can give some kind of organic and unity to the text and meaning to the text. And there will be different meanings because someone who is versed in classics, who knows all the classics, the Greeks, the Latins, the Romans, whatever there is, would have a better and probably a more deeper understanding than me or you or us who don't have that knowledge, right? Okay, so that's the point. So it's you get the point. In other words, every part of this poem, when you see a line, this highlighted areas, and I put the comments on the side to give the context and the meaning and the context. Historical, literary, biographical, etc., with notes and annotations, every part of the text. See, there's so many, every part. In order to read just one part, in order to read only this part, this first part, which is called the Burial of the Dead, of the poem, and it's a long part too. You see it's very long. You can't read it without using context. No text, right? No text functions in a void. Texts are always related to a context, and we cannot read outside of the context, right? Neo-criticism says you can do that. We know you can't, right? We can do that to a certain degree, but most of what we do is we relate it to a context. We have to put the text in a context in order to understand it. Otherwise, it will not be. You will miss so much, right? And so that's why readings are not similar. That's why in exams, for example, when you get a question, there is not wrong answer, unless you're completely off the topic, and there is not a right answer, but there is good answers, there is good, very good, excellent answers, right? And there is bad ones. Because readings are not, they're not equal. Right? Someone who brings more to the text has a better reading than someone who brings absolutely nothing. Someone who took more time to read the text and read about the text and understand it completely will give a different opinion, will give a different analysis than someone who did not read it, who read it once, who read nothing about it, and bring no culture, no knowledge, no education, nothing into the text. Do you understand this? This is how we do criticism. I will, next time we will go to another topic in criticism with other examples, and we'll see what happens. Okay? Thank you. Yes? I'm sorry? The slides? I will give you all the slides at the end. All right? I will give you everything, right? So you can read them.